Everybody. I believe we're live now. So I just want to introduce who is here to the Combined Authority meeting. This is West Yorkshire Combined Authority meeting. First of all, my name is Susan Hinchcliffe. I'm leader of Bradford Council, but chair of the Combined Authority. We also have Councillor Tim Swift, who is the leader of Calderdale and the deputy chair of the Combined Authority. Tim, can you indicate? Thank you. We have apologies today from Councillor Keith Aspen, who's the leader of York Council, but we have here the deputy here, who's Councillor Andy de Gorn from York. Take Councillor de Gorn, thank you. And we have apologies from Councillor Judith Blake, but we have from Leeds Council, but we have Councillor James Lewis here deputising for us, a deputy leader. Thank you, James. We have Councillor Stuart Galton, who's one of the balancing members from the opposition, a member from Leeds City Council. Please indicate Stuart, thank you. Councillor David Hall, I believe, has been replaced now by Councillor Lee from Calderdale, but Councillor Lee is unable to come here today. So we have deputising for him. We have Councillor Andrew Carter, who's opposition member from Leeds Council. Andrew Carter, would you like to indicate? Thank you. And then we have Councillor Denise Jeffrey, who is the leader of Wakefield Council. Please indicate, thank you. Roger Marsh, who is the chair of Leeds City Region Local Enterprise Partnership. We have Councillor Shabir Pandor, who is leader of Kirklees. Thank you. And we also have Councillor John Pennington, who is a little bit late in today because he is having some IT issues, but we hope that he will be able to join us very soon. With that, we've also got a number of officers, West Yorkshire Combined Authority officers and a visitor, in fact, on the call, but we'll bring them in as and when we go through the agenda. So we'll start with, we've done apologies for absence, I think. Ruth Chaplin, is there any other apologies for absence I may have missed there?
I've not received any others.
Thank you. I think I need to say our thanks to Councillor Hall, don't I think, actually, from Kirklees, who I believe obviously is now being replaced by Councillor Lee from Calderdale. But can I help ask him as to sort of record our thanks to him and also for all his work on the Corporate Audit and Governance Committee, which has been very valued over the last year or two that he's been with us. So can we please sort of express our thanks to him? Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Anybody with a declaration of pecuniary interest, please indicate now. I can't see anybody indicating. Sorry, I just noticed that I never introduced Councillor Kim Groves. My profuse apologies, Councillor Groves, who is the chair of the Transport Committee, who'll be talking later on. So apologies for that. I don't think I missed anybody else, did I? No, lovely. So no declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests. Exclusion of the press or public. I'm not sure any of the items on the agenda today are relevant in that regard, are they?
No, with no private and confidential items.
Fine, so we'll be able to go through the whole meeting without interruption. Minutes of the meeting of the Combined Authority held on the 21st of May. Those are in your pack for review. Has anybody any comments or questions on those? Obviously, there's a few items on the agenda which we'll go back on in terms of matters arising. So I take that as a full and accurate record of what happened at that meeting. Can I see a show of hands to indicate that is okay? Yes, I think we'll have to get used to that, won't we? But yes, can we just, thank you very much. That is carried. Now moving on to substantive items on the agenda. So first of all, we have COVID-19. Economic response and recovery. Can I just make the point before we start this that obviously a lot of people have lost their lives across the region, and we have a lot of families who are grieving at this time. Local authorities have been at the forefront of supporting those people, but also the communities in getting through this difficult time. And we will have all in our local authorities had those detailed papers and scrutiny of what has been happening there. And the decisions that have had to be made. At the Combined Authority today, we also need to focus on the economy side of things and how businesses are being supported in the recovery and how we support our businesses to employ people in the future. So I just wanted to say at the outset that all of us join together in expressing our condolences to people who've lost their lives and their families. And I'm sure everybody speaks with one voice on that. So Ben, did you want to start this item on economic recovery and on the business recovery and what support we've been offering? Obviously the paper is quite comprehensive, but would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to do that. And I think you're absolutely right in reminding everybody that the start of this is a public health challenge, and I think what is of note and of critical importance for what we're about to talk about in terms of economic recovery is that the impacts of that across the population have not been uniform, and we are seeing inequalities in terms of health outcomes caused by COVID, both in terms of socioeconomic group and in terms of BAME impacts as well. And that provides a kind of frame really for the work that we're ongoing and planning. I guess the backdrop to that is that as members will be aware, the infection rate is falling, and West Yorkshire is tracking the kind of national rate of about 284 per 100,000 population, and that has meant that the government has introduced measures, or is introducing measures, to release the lockdown, and that really puts more emphasis on the economic recovery and how that is going to work. And I'll return to that in terms of some of the particular challenges we have on the transport side. On the economy side, as members will be aware, a number of reports recently have estimated what will be some really significantly challenging economic impacts on the economy from the pandemic. The Monetary Committee indicating, for example, a 10% increase in unemployment and a 14% decrease in gross domestic product for the country as a whole. People use the words unprecedented a lot now, and it's absolutely worth just reminding ourselves that the scale of this, as predicted, is beyond the recent economic challenges. The forecasting work that we're undertaking at a West Yorkshire level is producing similar figures, and it's interesting that as that work has progressed, the economic forecasts have become, if anything, more pessimistic about the economic recovery. In terms of what we're seeing now in the economy, it is probably worth noting that about 28% of West Yorkshire's workforce is currently furloughed. That's about 256,000 people, and the impacts of what happens when those people and their companies decide what to do as the furlough process comes to an end will be absolutely of huge significance in terms of the economic recovery products that we can offer, and in terms of the national response. We are seeing about a 60% increase over last year's figures in terms of the businesses that are ceasing trading, and those businesses that are responding to surveys indicating that concerns about their supply chains, and the numbers of businesses that have got those concerns have risen by between a third and 50%. So there are some major kind of structural economic challenges that we face. Along with many other city regions, West Yorkshire has an economic recovery board that is meeting this afternoon, had met several times previously, and that board is really now is really honing in on the key recovery themes, and I guess that is both focused on the particular aspects of the West Yorkshire economy that require local input, of which there are several, but also a focus on what we think is right for the economy as a whole, with a particular focus on that issue of how we ensure that any economic recovery addresses those issues of inequality, and how it addresses the skills and employment challenges that I've outlined already. Our business support service, it was previously called the Growth Hub, remains extremely active. Engagements with businesses have been up 80% this year over last year, and the service has helped over 3,000 businesses since the pandemic since lockdown began. We have a team of, in conjunction with the local authorities, of 21 local growth managers, They've helped over 1,500 firms, with a further 400 firms supported strategically through our business strategic business support service. It is, despite that focus on COVID, it is worth noting that our kind of pre-COVID business support investment products are still being accessed by businesses, and we're also seeing inward investment inquiries as well, which shows that the economy still continues to function despite the focus on the pandemic. And in particular, I'd just point out that we launched the TV and Film Fund recently, that's had over 50 applications from small companies to help them progress through the current lockdown phase. We're also working closely with textile companies on developing the local PPE supply chain and creating that in a sustainable way. And of course, the local authorities, the constituent local authorities across the CA and York are also in the midst of rolling out and distributing their discretionary grant schemes. And we in the Combined Authority have had a role in trying to ensure that there is a level of consistency there, so that businesses aren't confused by a multitude of offers, and that's been really good joint working. I think our major challenges on the employment and skills front, we have relaunched what was previously called our employment hub. We relaunched that back in April. Take up to date has been about just under 200 people, so quite small compared to the scale of what we're expecting, and we are preparing for that ramping up, and that obviously will work in conjunction with similar hubs within local authorities. And we're also putting emphasis on the post-25 reboot service that offers to retrain people, particularly in digital skills, that have left the workforce. Moving on from the economy onto transport specifically, I'm going to hand over to Dave Pearson. I think he is on the call just to say a bit more about this. But fundamentally, we find ourselves with the bus and rail services now back up to about 75% of services being operated. They stepped back up over the course of June. We are seeing the effective capacity, because of social distancing, being just under 20% of what it should be normally. And we're approaching that point in terms of patronage, although the patterns of that over the course of the day are still very different to what they would be on a normal working day. But of course, the emphasis now is on how to prepare for the proposed changes in social distancing guidelines. Just before handing over to Dave, I'll make one last comment, which is the transport impacts, particularly on the bus service, are causing a major financial impact on the Combined Authority as an organisation, and creating in-year and potentially future year financial pressures. And we will be looking to bring up a finance paper back to the next Combined Authority to deal with these issues in a bit more detail. But Chair, may I hand over to Dave Pearson for a bit more detail on the public transport side?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, to really bring you up to date with what's happened since we published this report. As you know, last week the non-essential retail reopened, and we saw a bit more growth in the use of public transport over the week. So I think that 20% that we quote in the paper has gone to around about 25%, which, as Ben said, is just about sort of coping in terms of the capacity constraints that the social distancing does impose. The spread of when people travel is different to the normal sort of morning and evening peak type of spread. So the busiest time on public transport is in the middle of the day at the moment, and we are seeing quite a significant sort of reduction in the number of people who are commuting to work at peak times, and that's probably consistent with the limited reoccupation of office type of jobs. On Tuesday, we saw the announcement by the government of some level of relaxation on the social distancing requirements, and that will increase capacity a little on buses and trains, and we're working through that with the bus and rail industry and the government as to what in practice that actually means. But I think the general view is it's unlikely that the capacity of public transport is going to increase at all above 50% of its normal capacity. So the public transport network throughout the summer will be severely capacity constrained. We have taken the appropriate precautions in our bus stations to reinforce social distancing and to reinforce the wearing of face coverings, which became a mandatory requirement on public transport as of last week. As of yesterday, we have launched on the Metro website the Combined Authority provides some resources to enable people to print or to scan off cards. Those people who are not required to wear face coverings can access something which demonstrates that to bus drivers and other public transport staff who might ask them. So we're trying to support those people who aren't required to wear face coverings through that method. And finally, as Ben mentioned, the financial impacts on public transport and particularly on bus are quite acute. The level of fare paying passengers has reduced to around about 5 to 10% of normal, so that's 80% to 85% of revenue that isn't in the system. We are continuing to pay bus operators for concessionary fares and for contracted services at rates we would have been paid before the pandemic, but there's still a significant funding gap that is being bridged by emergency funding at the moment through the government and through our own actions. But there's a lot of uncertainty as to that emergency government funding is only until August. We don't know what happens beyond August, and at some point as funding reduces and patronage doesn't build back, then there's going to be a gap, and that's one of the key financial challenges that the Combined Authority is going to face over the coming months. So I'm happy to take questions on any of that.
Thank you very much. So quite a lot to run through there. So first of all, poverty kills, and therefore we need to do all we can to support the economy to recover through the Combined Authority. And I can't say how important that is, because obviously COVID has claimed a lot of deaths, but poverty and inequalities, as Ben still outlined at the beginning, also are very bad for communities and bad for people's life chances. I think there's a few sectors that have been missing from government support, haven't they? Combined authorities, ourselves being one of those, is one. We've not had the level of support that I would like to have seen for Combined Authority. That 12 million gap is something that is concerning. And also along with that, the FE sector and HE sector and the culture industry and other sectors that have not yet had the support that they need. So I would open it with that. But I can see a few people indicating to come in. I've got Councillor Carter and Councillor Groves. Councillor Carter, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A bit of guidance from you. I'm quite prepared to make all my comments subject to wanting to come back on the answers in one go. If that will be helpful rather than jumping in.
Absolutely, thank you. It's just easy to manage. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, can I just begin by thanking the staff at WICA. I mean, the report is extremely detailed and also very helpful, and it pulls together for us things across the whole of the West Yorkshire area, which is in itself very helpful. So I'll start on that very positive note. I also, obviously, the fact that we got over the whole of West Yorkshire £450 million worth of grants, which from the government, which we've distributed to 34,000 businesses, is extremely helpful. However, the first point that I want to ask a question on is that I know that WICA had an input into the drawing up of the discretionary grant funding to businesses that had missed out on grants the first time around. To be frank, the take-up of that in Leeds, and it was about £8 million that can be distributed, is extremely poor. And the deadline expires on the 28th of June next week. Is that the same across the whole of West Yorkshire? If so, are we advising local authorities to see how they can make the criteria less stringent within government guidelines? If not, and we are restricted in some way, then we should be making an ask of government. That's the point on that one. Because it is no good us sitting on money we've been given by government that's supposed to be feeding down into local businesses if it's simply not happening. So I distinguish between the large grants, where I think most local authorities have and indeed WICA have performed extremely well, and the discretionary grants, where I'm afraid the reverse, certainly in Leeds, is the case. Second point is on PPE and healthcare supply chain. We have a great opportunity here. We still have quite an interesting and quite a sizable manufacturing base, which a lot of which, particularly in textiles, and I know quite a bit about that particular industry, having spent years working in it, can really diversify and help us to stop importing from places like China. Can you give members of WICA, elected members of WICA, details of how they should refer potential suppliers to WICA officers to get support and advice? And the final point is then to look at the point that Dave has made on transport. And indeed, it applies to all the papers we're looking at a little later. I made the point about stress testing earlier. I'm extremely concerned that and WICA are involved across the piece with major transport infrastructure schemes, which I guess the Mayor will be inheriting in part next year. All of those need subjecting to a stress test on their financial viability, given the changed circumstances. I'll give you an example. The Leeds City Connect scheme, 176 million of government money, predicated on doubling bus usage. Well, that's not going to happen. Nobody believes that is going to happen. So I just want some assurance that we are rigorously looking at all of these public transport schemes, given the situation that's now unfolding. So I would like some reassurance on that. Just finally, on the 12 million black hole, I think this is more overlooked than ignored. And I think we just need to remind government that the combined authorities, not just local authorities, have a black hole, which is particularly in the case of WICA helping businesses, something we should seek to get addressed. And I will certainly put my input into that. I just noticed Stuart Galton made a point of saying it's discretionary. The discretionary grants I mentioned, they are discretionary, but there are government guidelines as to how they should be distributed, and local authorities, I think, have probably beefed those up too much, and that is one of the reasons I'm querying it. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carter, and thank you for your comments about WICA staff, which I'm sure we all applaud as well, and your support for trying to get government to listen to that 12 million gap. Really important that we all stick together on that. We're a tightly run organisation, so every penny counts. Just to feedback initially on some of your comments, the discretionary grants. Discretionary is an unusual term. Actually, it's quite subjective in this instance, because actually the guidance from government was quite prescriptive about which groups they expected all the local authorities to cover, and therefore there isn't a great deal of discretion. And obviously it was updated again and again right up until the launch date. I think we all have different deadlines, so we're not quite all the same. Our deadline was last Friday, I think, actually, Councillor Carter in Bradford. Obviously yours is coming up, so it's not quite the same. We have made, and I've personally made the point to the Minister at NHCLG about the fact that we've got 6.8 million in Bradford, but actually we've got more for government money in our coffers at the moment that we could give out if they gave us permission to do so. So I'd like to see that being sort of tripled at least, and perhaps quadrupled, to make sure that we can actually reach more businesses. But without that government's indication that they're prepared to do that and prepared to cover that cost, we're left with quite a limited scheme actually, and a lot of demand. So and that's one thing on the discretionary stuff. PPE, I just want to go to Roger on this actually, because Roger, I know you've done quite a lot on PPE, and I'll bring it in Shabir.
Yeah, thank you, and a very good question, Councillor Carter. And there are many examples. I won't go into detail. A combination of David Shepherd and Brian Archer, who are two senior officials in WICA, have been coordinating our approach across the business community. So I would encourage any colleagues on the call or beyond that know of businesses that are either have responded to the challenge or are looking to do so, to contact either of them, or failing which, Councillor Carter, I'm happy to take that directly. The example of a business is Herida Healthcare, who supplied all the mattresses, most of the mattresses to the Nightingale hospitals, and a number of weeks ago weren't even contemplating making reusable sterile gowns, and are now, I think, on the hopefully about to receive a sizable contract to supply British hands made to our health sector, and avoid low grade, high cost, one use landfill freight incurring imports from places far away. And so there's many examples of that, and that's part of my own view of how we might reimagine and the improving of our onshoring manufacturing that could lead to enhanced exporting rather than limiting importing. But that's just an example, Councillor Carter, and there are a number of others.
So Ben, do you just want to say practically how businesses are interested in this sphere, which I think was Councillor Carter's specific question about how they notify whether they're interested in being part of the supply chain of this product?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. So as Roger says, we can, if it's simplest, we'll share the contact details around to members, which has the email and the contact details for those officers that are leading on this PP issue for us. I should say that that team are talking to over 120 companies already, and we're using the Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation to help broker some of the connections between the companies making the right, adhering to the right standards with potential purchasers, particularly the NHS.
Thank you. Now, I'm conscious, obviously, we've got a transport question to answer for Councillor Carter, but before going to Dave Pearson, can I just bring in Councillor Shabir Pandor, who I think is one. Councillor Pandor, you're silent.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? I should be okay now. Yeah, a couple of points, Chair. Firstly, I think Councillor Andy Carter has raised a really important issue regarding the discretionary grants, and I understand that we may be at different phases in terms of what our deadlines are. But I think what might be a suggestion in terms of moving forward is to actually just analyse what's happened in each local authority with the discretionary grants, and there are gaps there, and how can we actually get some new creative thinking around that, and then hopefully go back to government with your contacts, Susan, with the ministers, just explain to them that, look, these are the gaps, there's some cracks there. We want to try and do as much as we can in terms of re-energizing the economy, restarting new businesses, etc. So there's something there that we can actually do more for our economy, on top of all the excellent work that's been done by all local authorities and our great staff at the Combined Authority. The other point, in terms of PPE, and this is just a comment and observation, the local firm within Kirklees that manufactures blinds, and I was talking to the owner a few days ago, and what he has started to do is, because they have fabric that comes in and they manufacture the blinds, they've been manufacturing PPE, various sorts, on a voluntary basis, because what they wanted to do was make sure that their workforce is still busy, and I think somebody from the Combined Authority did actually contact them. But if we can just, based on what Roger said, if we can just capitalize on that, because they are a local firm that can flex and they can be creative and do things differently, because these are Yorkshire firms, the British firms, and they'll achieve the standard very, very quickly in terms of what we want to make sure that, you know, we do provide this right PPE gear. So I think that's just an observation, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. So there's a strong theme coming out really in how we can support local businesses to be part of the supply chain and new industries which are coming along in a time when, of course, a lot of industries are under threat at the moment. I'm still want to go to Dave Pearson, but Roger, did you want to come back in quickly on that? Because
yeah, I just wanted to just share with colleagues that there is a huge cut, make and trim requirement on the basis that Reader and others secure significant contracts, and knowing where those sources of opportunity are, Councillor Pandora and others, would be really helpful to know. And I'm happy in the interest of speed, not only to support officers, but be a repository of any inward comments, just to make sure we expedite this opportunity for our region, but also for our skilled workforce to be able to be engaged in this.
thank you, Roger, for that. Perhaps we can send something around combined authority members so they know how to access and how to support businesses who are interested in this area. Ben, if you can take that as an action. I think there's also a further action about the discretionary grants and how those are going. From my own understanding of it, the process is a lot that the government has set aside is a lot more rigorous than the first lot was that they gave us. So they require us to look at their accounts and things like that. So it's quite much more laborious than the first set of grants, which was just get it out the door as quickly as possible. So I think perhaps if we can collate some of that feedback and send it to government, asking for them to release further funds to pay and fund and support more businesses, I think that would be something helpfully we could do as a joint authority, because it sounds like it is something that goes cross-party actually. We all want to use the money that government has given us to the max. None of us want to give any of it back. So we prefer it to be spent in West Yorkshire than in Westminster. So if we can jointly lobby for that, let's send that letter and make sure we all sign up to it. And I want to move on to Dave Pearson, just to tackle some of the transport questions there about financial viability.
Yes, Councillor Carter makes a good point. Obviously, the economy is changing, and the Economic Recovery Board that's been set up will look at how best to respond to that across the whole region, but that does require a recalibration to a certain extent of how we look at investment projects going forward. But if Councillor Carter refers to the aim to double bus patronage in Leeds, well, lying behind that is a desire to move people onto more sustainable modes of transport, and those requirements and objectives are probably even more relevant now in the new world coming out of the COVID emergency, and so to a certain extent, in that case, the measurability of that might have changed, but the objectives probably very much the same. So I think that we will need to adapt the way in which we look at things going forward, and in some respects, that actually heightens the need to look at the environmental and the social and the economic benefits of schemes going forward.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring Councillor Groves in actually as well, because obviously the government is saying use your car at the moment, but that's not sustainable. So people are going to have to use the bus and public transport again. Councillor Groves, do you want to just move on to that?
Yeah. Just to plea, really, that actually cross-party we can lobby government along with business, because if people can't get to work, then business is going to suffer. And really to highlight the emergency situation that we are facing, as the operators decide to focus on their commercial routes, the routes will be the routes that they no longer want to continue with will be handed back to WICA, and we will not have the subsidy. So it's my concern that across West Yorkshire, there will be many communities who are already on an hour service left without no transport at all. The other pressure that we face within 12 weeks is obviously the school transport and how we manage that. And I think we get into a situation where there is a real risk if we do not get that funding. We're not going to be able to operate services, and we're not going to be able to get people to employment or to education.
Thanks to Councillor Gross. So we've actually looked at quite a few issues within the paper there. Is there anything else anybody wants to raise before we move on to the next paper? Please indicate now, or if ever hold your peace. No, well, with that, just looking at the paper, the recommendation was to note all the work that is going on. I think you've also heard Ben Still, Managing Director, that we're very appreciative as Combined Authority members of all the work that has been done. There is still some lobbying for us to do as elected members on things like getting more money for the grant scheme for businesses, getting transport in the right place, properly funded, and that 12 million gap that we have in the finances. And I think we're all going to do our utmost to support a common and united message on that front to get the result that we need. So with that, I just ask people to indicate that they're happy with the recommendation that we note the progress on delivery and development of the response to the COVID-19 crisis. But can we also add to that then recommendations that we write to the Ministry of Housing and Local Government about using the additional funding that we could have for business grants, and that we push government to have a more cohesive response on the sustainable funding for combined authorities throughout this crisis. Was there anything else there that I missed with that, Ben? Did I resolve to do anything else during that conversation?
Chair, we will put round further information to members on PPE.
That's right. Lovely, and PPE, of course, absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Right, so can I just see those in favour, please show. Put your hand up in your screen. Is everybody showing? Lovely, thank you very much. That is carried. So moving on now then to the next item on the agenda, which is capital spending projects and approvals. I don't know, Councillor Jeffrey, you are the chair of this committee. I don't know if you want to do some open remarks before moving on to Melanie, who's the Director of Development.
Yes, please, Chair. Just to say that with the COVID crisis, schemes have slowed down a bit, and which has been inevitable, really. But we have managed to speed up, and as I say, there are 15 schemes here today, all good schemes, and we're looking to spend 34.81 million on all this. So I hope when Melanie takes you through the schemes, if there are any questions, I know she will, but it was a worthwhile meeting and we got plenty of schemes through, and hopefully it will start to make a difference.
And it's so important, isn't it, at the moment, to try and accelerate that capital expenditure. It's going to support our economic growth. So thanks to all the committee that you're chairing there, Councillor Jeffrey, for keeping that going and making sure that projects can continue. I just want to bring in Melanie to go through the schemes, and I'll bring in Councillor Galton, who's indicating. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just at a programme level first, there are a couple of requests, recommendations from Investment Committee to the Combined Authority to agree the first tranche of Transforming Cities Fund so that we can release that funding to start the programme. We've already started the programme with some funding from the Transport Fund, and we'd like to formally sort of pay that back, if you like, in terms of that funding approval, and then spend a further allocation to get things moving further. And then we also have the Emergency Active Travel Fund that we'd recommend approval for in terms of releasing that funding, because we've got the opportunity from government to introduce active travel measures, pop-up cycle lanes, temporary segregation of cycling and walking. So it's worth us trying to test some of that out while our roads are quieter. So we're recommending that we move forward on that as well. And we've got a bid that we submitted on behalf of West Yorkshire authorities. So we're just asking for approval on that one. And then we've also got, as Councillor Jeffrey said, quite a large number of schemes that have come forward. So our Transforming Cities Fund is a programme that will run across West and North Yorkshire. So when we made the submission, it was for Leeds City Region, and we're focused on promoting active travel and public transport. And we've got a number of schemes that are looking at improving the access of our station gateways, so rail travel, but making it easier for cyclists and people to walk and get access to those facilities. I'm also looking at the importance of placemaking and putting the investment into making that a more attractive place and a more attractive gateway. So we've got 3 schemes here from North Yorkshire authorities to fund in terms of station access. We've got a number of schemes where we're looking at highways, but we're particularly looking at bus priority. So there's a couple of those connecting lead schemes where we're building on the work of our LipTip programme to extend some of the benefits of those corridors out into other local authority areas. So we're particularly looking at the connectivity between Leeds and Wakefield and Leeds and Castleford and Pontefract. So there's some opportunity there to extend some of those benefits from the LipTip programme through into TCF and learn from some of that. We've also got a Halifax Station Gateway scheme that's come forward. We've got some corridor improvement packages that are looking at bus priority, and there's particularly one this time that's come forward from Home Firth, from Kirklees. And then we've got a City Connect walking and cycling opportunity at Castleford to continue the Castleford Greenway, where there's currently a gap between the works that have been done, but there's a gap in the route that we'd like to address. So a real selection of schemes, primarily focused on public transport and active travel. We've also got Leeds City Centre Armley Gyratory, which is obviously a significant project in terms of improving the resilience of the network, particularly in the centre of Leeds. So there's a whole selection of schemes that have come forward.
Thank you very much for that, Melanie. Councillor Galton.
Thanks, Chair. If you don't mind, I'll take the items in the round, because it was through going through all of these ambitious projects that several issues emerged. And the first one is I am actually a ward councillor for one of the projects which is in place, which is the A639 improvement scheme. And I was frustrated that this was the first opportunity that I had to have a look at the proposals that were being proposed that was supposed to benefit my community. But my community hadn't had the chance to actually make a judgment on the proposals that were there. And it just raises some of the issues that we've got in terms of our decision-making process to ensure that they are working correctly, and that where the scheduling of the combined authority doesn't exactly align with those of the local authorities, that there is still an effort made to ensure that proper stakeholding consultation takes place. Because when I've gone through the background information for the A639 one, for instance, stakeholder consultation basically means talking to the bus companies. And it's just to emphasize that this is meant to be for the benefit of communities. But to get back to the active travel element of this paper as well, since the Transforming Cities projects were put in and COVID has arrived on our streets, the relative importance of active travel has increased. And one of the things I also noted by going through the paperwork for these bids that are going forward to government is that actually it's the buses, in terms of their shared space on things like bus lanes, that are valued more than the active travel. And I think we have an opportunity now as a combined authority to reintroduce that value for active travel when we're taking forward these projects, and also thinking about how we can add value to them so that they're not just standalone, about accessibility between one node of transport and another, and commutability into Leeds and other centres for the workforce. Because in the future we are going to be developing, I would suggest, as a result of COVID and the climate change emergency, which we'll come to a little bit later on, these 15-minute communities where people are going to be enabled to better access local facilities and local working in a way that hasn't been done previously. And we should be future-proofing these decisions that we're making so that they're not a deal between us and government in terms of rules that were current a year or two previously, and the world has changed since. They should be developing discussions, not just between us and government as a combined authority, but also between us and the communities that they're also meant to be benefiting. So that's just a principled comment on us going forward, because I think the stuff that we're trying to do on active travel, if it was better implemented into these bigger projects, then we will get even more benefit going forward.
So thank you, Councillor Galton. I think obviously these projects aren't developed in isolation, so our local authorities should be absolutely in partnership with the combined authority and making sure those connectivities are made at local level. I'll go to Melanie just to answer those questions, and then I'll bring you in, Councillor Carter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Galton, just on the main points there, just picking up on the A639 and actually all the schemes that are coming through in transforming cities. These are at the first decision point. So these are at what we call a strategic outline case. And at this point, we're asking schemes to identify what's the issue, how are we proposing to solve it, and what are the range of options that we're looking at in terms of looking at this particular issue. So it's the earliest decision point possible. Well, once they've got an approval at this stage, it then allows them to move forward to develop an outline business case, at which stage they'll have a range of options that they can discuss much more widely with communities, with members, and take that forward. So I know there was some agreement at a political level with the projects that were included in the bid last September, but at the moment, it's still very early stages in terms of developing those schemes. So now is the time, once we have at least an explanation of what that scheme could be, to start those discussions. So I think you're absolutely right to ask about it, because the time is right now. And we're looking at how can we do online consultations that are meaningful, that are reaching out to the widest possible groups as well. So we're currently looking at that. The consultation will be led by the scheme sponsor. So whichever local authority is leading on that scheme will lead that, but they may well do that in conjunction with the combined authority. I think as well, in terms of the point about the appraisal really and the active travel, we are working very closely with government to feed in our views in terms of the economic appraisal and the financial appraisal of these transport schemes. You're right in that that the motorist is given priority in the current modelling and the current way that we appraise our transport fund schemes. And clearly we've moved away from that position. So Treasury are currently reviewing their Green Book, and we've got a number of our officers that are in discussion groups to try to influence Treasury in terms of what that looks like. We've also picked up we picked up an error actually in the government's AMAT tool, which it uses to measure the benefits of active travel, which we've then fed back to government and fed in how we might strengthen this. So we're trying to do all that we can. And what we're saying to sponsors is that where the funding is coming from DFT, we recognise that we have to use the current TAG appraisal process, but we will take other wider benefits into account. So we are looking at all sorts of economic benefits, health benefits, economic benefits, much wider than just the purely the TAG appraisal. So we are taking that on board.
Thank you. So I think probably Councillor Galton will want to speak to you, Melanie, or somebody about the specific projects in his area after this meeting. But Councillor Carter, can I bring you in now for your questions? Can you keep them short, please? I hate to be really bossy as a chair, but I'm just conscious of time as well. So thank you.
Yes, I'll keep it very short. It just goes back to what I've said previously. All these schemes very worthwhile, but it is at the strategic level, and I shall be expecting to see rigorous financial appraisal, given the fact that we've now had COVID and that there is going to be a considerable number more people working from home, which will affect all modes of transport. I also think that I would want to see certainly drilled down to localities, so local authorities very much involved, how we improve walking to work. And in some of the older areas of our metropolitan areas, you know, there's a network of ginnels, footways, all sorts of things that we used to use many years ago. Many of them now still capable of using if a bit of attention was paid to them and some money invested in them. And maybe as part of all this, we should be ensuring we look at those. Was that quick enough for you?
That's lovely. That's surprisingly quick. Thank you very much. That's good. So I think before I bring Melanie in, I'd just like to say that actually transport is still as important as it ever was. And we had poor connectivity within West Yorkshire before, and we still have now. And obviously with COVID and economic recovery, I personally feel that we need to really accelerate our delivery on transport. So yes, we've all had different ways of working. I, for one, don't want to be working at home online forever. I prefer to be in an office. So I think we still need that transport focus going forward. I just want to make that clear. Melanie, do you want to just quickly come on the walking routes that Councillor Carter was indicating there? Again, can you answer briefly, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, active travel is looking at cycling and walking provision, and all local authorities are currently looking at that. We also encourage them to consider that in all of their schemes that are coming forward. And similarly, we're looking at climate change and climate emergency issues as well. So we do appraise all of those areas when we look at the appraisal. And I guess it's worth bearing in mind that while the funding is time limited, the benefits will be for longer term. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at an investment in our infrastructure.
Thank you, Melanie, for that. So if there aren't, Councillor Groves, did you want to come in briefly?
Yeah, just on that point and long term, that's absolutely fine. But I think in terms of what we need to push back to government, if we implement cycling and walking schemes, we need capital to maintain those schemes in the future.
That is a very good point. And that presumably is not in the schemes as they are. Maintenance. All those cycleways do need regular cleaning and maintenance, and obviously that is an additional cost on local authorities, highway authorities. So we absolutely need to be on that. Any more questions, comments? No. So just go to the recommendations. Melanie, do you want to just repeat the recommendations so everybody's aware?
Yeah. So sorry, I've not got the right page open, but I'll just bring it back up.
It was about transforming cities, wasn't it? And making sure we do the down payment on transforming cities.
Yeah.
Make sure the capital approvals are done.
Yeah. So the recommendations are over a number of pages, but basically they start on page 107. So basically, we're asking to approve 11.851 million of TCF funding to repay development costs to partners that have already been incurred, but also to draw down the next tranche. We're asking to approve expenditure against the DFT Emergency Active Travel Fund, and presently this is 2.513 million, but we want to delegate the actual transfer of that funding to the partner councils to the managing director. And then each of the schemes, we're recommending that these approved at this stage and go through to the next stage in the assurance process.
So I'm happy for Councillor Jeffreys proposing that. I'm happy to second that.
Yeah,
can I see?
Fine.
Thank
Yes.
you, Councillor Jeffrey. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. That's lovely. Thank you. And we just need to accelerate capital expenditure, I feel, at the moment, in terms of to get our economy moving. So anything we can do, Melanie, on making sure we've got the capacity to deliver projects quicker. We have the schemes developed, so when money comes out from central government, we're ready to go with it and have schemes ready to show them and to fund. I think it's absolutely important, very vitally important at the moment. So moving now on to the next item, which is adult education budget, which is a nice thing, because that comes with devolution deal, and we have a devolution deal. And in spite of the current difficult times we're living through, our devolution deal gives us hope that we're going to have some muscle to build a good economy in the future. So, Alan, did you want to introduce this item?
If I could say a few words, thank you, Councillor Hinchcliffe. So, as you said, this is a key part of the devolution deal. We're expecting £63 million a year worth of adult education budget funding to be devolved. We have agreed with government that this will be from the academic year 2021-22. That means that there's quite a lot of work that we need to do in order to get ready for that. So we have written to the Department for Education, setting out how we are becoming ready. We have also issued a consultation on the strategic skills strategy, the adult education budget strategy, which sets out how we will approach distribution of AEB. That consultation is currently live. It started on the 25th of May and will close on the 12th of July. It will then come back following any changes to the combined authority for endorsement in September. It's been developed in collaboration with the local authorities and with the Employment and Skills Panel and others, and we are having various consultation events and so on with colleges and providers. This is absolutely key to supporting the combined authorities' objectives around inclusive growth. So the strategy sets out in its priorities that one of the aims is to make learning more inclusive and support disadvantaged people and tackle inequalities. A particular role in supporting unemployed people back to work, and then enable them to sustain that employment and unlock progression. We're looking for feedback from colleges, local authorities and others on the consultation. The initial feedback that we've had from the Department for Education, it's worth feeding back, they're really impressed with the work. So there's more work to do, but the feedback that we've had is very positive. What we're asking of the combined authority today is simply to note the progress that's been made so far, and to signal that we will be bringing back a final version for endorsement in September.
So thank you very much for that, Alan. I'll bring you in a moment, Roger, just to say, though, with this item that we've talked a lot about transport in this meeting, and we're going to talk about transport in the next item. The other major area for investment, I do believe, is skills. And we have to invest, and government has to join us in that investment of skills as well. The adult education budget is already, it's work that's already commissioned, so it's not additional money. So we do need additional monies on top of the adult education budget to really accelerate the delivery of skills and make sure that people who may have been made recently redundant, or young people, or people who are long-term unemployed, all have access to good skills so they can get the jobs they need to put food on the table for their families. I'm going to bring in Roger first, and I've got Councillor Pennington also indicating.
Thank you, Susan. First of all, can I pay tribute to colleagues on the Employment and Skills Panel of the LEP, both from the private and public sector, and officers for getting us to this point where there is a comprehensive draft strategy out for consultation. And whilst some of us may well have turned the pages on that, I thought it might be useful if we could, Susan, through Alan, for colleagues on the call and those who may be listening to us, just to flesh out in a big picture sense what will be different and better as a consequence of our local control of this budget, because obviously the issues won't go away that we're trying to tackle, but how we will do it in a more comprehensive and more successful way than hitherto. And that's, again, not making any criticism of previous regimes, but how we will do something that's becomes a new extraordinary ordinary, if you follow my logic. So it'd be useful just to perhaps just to get a sense of the 2 or 3 areas of success we aspire to by being in control of our own destiny. Thank you.
That's a good challenge, Roger. Alan, would you like to come in on that?
Absolutely. So at the moment, the funding is administered by a national agency, the Education and Skills Funding Agency. By devolving it, it will enable us to make the skills system more responsive to local need. So we will be able to have more influence as a region with local training providers, put in place more agreements with them on a formal basis about what they will provide, and create better links between the people accessing the skills, the training providers, and the economy. So we will be able to more easily fill the skills gaps that exist locally, and also create opportunities to build skills in those sectors which are most important to the local economy. We will have greater opportunity to focus on quality and have a better grip on the system. What I would say though, and this is set out in the strategy, is that we are mindful not to disrupt the provision that exists. So change will happen over time. It's important that we ensure that providers have a degree of stability, and so I think that the change that we will see from the evolution of this budget will get greater as time goes on. That's worth saying. The change won't happen immediately. The other thing, just to Councillor Hinchcliffe's point, is that this potentially opens the door to further devolution of aspects of the skills system in the future. So we need to be able to demonstrate that this is successful, has impact, because as the recommendations that were set out in the interim report of the Skills Commission, which is chaired by Councillor Hinchcliffe, we want much more local control over other aspects of the skills system as well.
Thank you, Alan. Councillor Jeffrey, just want to put yourself on silence. I think you may have come off mute. Did you put on mute? So we've got a bit of howl around. So I'm going to bring. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Pennington, it may be you howling around, but you are about to speak. So would you like to speak and then put yourself on silence?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I'm sorry, I joined a few minutes late due to technical problems. Goodness knows where. But are we still on the briefing, or are we on the main board meeting?
No, this is the main board meeting. So we're just on the adult education budget item.
Yeah, I know where we are. So I did have some questions previously, but maybe we'll come back and revisit them. Just a couple of quick questions to Alan on this AEB funding. We're saying that a third of it is going to independent training providers, which is 15 or 16 million pounds, which is an awful lot of money. So the question is, have we got some examples of who these training providers are? And an additional question is, has any money gone to any of the colleges?
I think the answer to that is yes and yes. Councillor Carter, I've got you coming in next, actually. So apologies, I didn't make that clear. Alan, would you like to just come back in on that, and I'll bring Councillor Carter in?
Yeah, I'm going to struggle to name independent training providers. We can write round afterwards, I'm afraid. But the answer to does it go to colleges is yes, definitely.
I think my understanding it goes to colleges. There's also people like Workers Ed, is it WEA? I think it goes to as well. I've had a letter from them this week. So Councillor Groves, quickly.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if I should have declared that I'm a director of Inspiring Positive Futures. However, what I wanted to ask was, we've had lots of funding in the past. We've had disjointed skills funding for numbers of years. How are we going to make sure that the people that are most disadvantaged are linked to the opportunities that emerge in the economy? Because I think that's really important, that they're not pigeonholed into, as happened before, into either hairdressing or motor mechanics when they have so many more skills to offer.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. I'm going to bring Councillor Carter first before I go back to Alan with an answer to that.
Yes, thank you.
Carter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I welcome the progress made so far. This was one of the key asks of the devolution project, and one which I was very happy to support. And I'm reassured by the comments made, I'm sorry, by the officer, because obviously we don't want to disrupt a lot of the good practice that's going on already. It's not a question of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So the fact that we're progressing this in a quite speedy but very sensible way is, I'm sure, the right approach. I'm glad to hear that the DFE seem to be happy with how we're progressing things. I think this is one of the biggest opportunities through devolution, and it's often overlooked as we obsess about transport and other things. And so I look forward to the paper that's going to come back to us, I think in September. Yeah, am I right?
Lovely, thank you very much, Councillor Carter. Alan, would you like to respond to those from Councillor Groves and Councillor Carter?
Yeah, on the latter, yes, thanks, Councillor Carter. It will be coming back in September, and we welcome any comments in the meantime from people as it's out for consultation. To Councillor Groves' point, having devolution having devolution of the budget will enable us to make those links much more easily. So at the moment, the skills programs that we deliver, we can aim to do what you've described. We have discretion over how we target programs towards disadvantaged people, and make the links for them between with opportunities that are in the jobs market. Devolution of the AEB enables us to do that on a much broader basis, and we will also have the ability to measure the impact in a way that we don't at the moment. So we can, for instance, we will be able to say, right, we want to increase the number of people with basic skills relevant to the employment market. We can then measure that and also target that measurement so that we are focusing on particular communities, people further from the labour market, and so on. So I think there are, I'm not saying it's easy, but there are a range of more targeted measures that we can put in place with local control that we're not able to at the moment.
Thank you, Alan. So this is an opportunity for us. Obviously, in the Combined Authority, we're unique actually in the country, and that we already have delivery agreements in place with all our colleges. They've been really active partners with us in making sure that, trying to make sure that we've got skills that people want and also that businesses need. So trying to make that system work is very important for us. We've already made a head start on that, I'd say ahead of other places, but having this AEB devolved to us, as Councillor Carter says, really gives us a bit more oomph and enables us to connect the system more carefully. Roger, did you want to come in and then I'll move to vote?
Yeah, just a quick comment and maybe a question, but perhaps we can pick this up when we come to look at it again in September. To what extent, once we've been through the consultation and recognising the very large skills capital programme that we've been implementing over the last 5 years, some £80 million of central taxpayer money from the centre, to what extent will we need to be augmenting some of our facilities to enable these enhanced outcomes across West Yorkshire? And perhaps that's a question for later, but if Alan had a comment or others had a comment, because there may be some fairly significant capital needs in certain places so as to be able to meet the demands in a volumetric sense rather than just in a topical sense.
So skills capital Mark II is what you're thinking about, I think. Alan?
I think that applies not just to the adult education budget. I think that applies more broadly across the system. Yes, but as is well known, the amount of skills capital available in the system at the moment is not much, and it's something that we would want to see more of in the future. So. Lovely,
thank you very much. I forgot my microphone on. Yes, I have. Excellent. The recommendations is to note that paper then. I'm happy to propose that. If you see that's seconded by Roger, perhaps all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much for that. That is carried. So moving on now to the next item, let me just get it up on my screen, which is, we have a guest, I believe, for this next item, which is Transport for the North. Are coming to this. I'll just move to it. Hang on a moment. I was trying to go through this paper. So here we go. Transport for the North, COVID-19 economic response and recovery. We have a guest with us, is Owen Wilson from Transport for the North, who is Owen now made himself visible. Oh, yes, he has. Lovely. Yes. And Councillor Groves, who's chair of the Transport Committee for West Yorkshire. Councillor Groves, would you like to introduce this item, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The paper sets out the Transport for the North Economic Recovery Plan. Transport for the North is seeking to write to the Secretary of State for Transport and making the case for accelerated transport investment in the North. West Yorkshire Combined Authority, working with district partners, has highlighted a number of schemes to go forward. I'm sure that Transport for the North will have to prioritise those schemes. But we have, we'll look at Transport for the North, we're looking for sign off for this their board meeting on the 29th of July. Just in terms of the detail, the on the rail schemes, most of them have already been identified in Network Rail's continuous modular strategic planning exercise, and they range from things like the Leeds Station Extension Platform 3, Bradford Foster Square, a second platform at Castleford, Woodusford Corridor improvements serving the 5 towns, the Transpennine route upgrade projects such as Marsden, Slathwaite, Deetham, Mayfield, Ravensthorpe, supporting platform extensions around West Yorkshire. We've put in the proposal of our new stations to be built, White Rose, Leeds Bradford Airport and Fort Park. Accessibility schemes at Crossgates, where we've been unsuccessful before, Horsforth, Todmorden, Menston, Garforth and Pontefract. We've also asked partner councils to submit their priority highway schemes, which include Dawson's Corner, Regent's Street Flyover, Tongue Street, Errand, Brighouse, Junction Improvements, Barnsdale Bar, the M62 Junction 32 and the Outer Ring Road improvements in the North, East and North West. Transport for the North is also considering a wider set of priorities as part of the plan, and the Combined Authority has fed into that, and our submission includes the West Yorkshire Future Mobility Zone proposals, funding for fibre installation on the rail networks and 5G rollout, acceleration of integrated and smart ticketing initiatives, including the TfN integrated ticketing programme that we have put forward that we would want to be a pilot for, with having the M card in West Yorkshire. So I'll leave it up there and hand over to Owen at Transport for the North.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. And yes, and I've actually just come from a meeting of officers, including officers from West Yorkshire, discussing this plan. We took a report to the board on the 11th of June, outlining our proposals to develop the plan. That's TfN's board, and the letter that we would send to the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps. So that went a week ago now. I understand we will get a response fairly soon from the Department for Transport. And that letter set out our kind of intentions and principles around this economic recovery plan. And this is building on the relationship we have across the North with all of the transport authorities, and on the evidence that we've got in our longer term investment programme. So in terms of the ERP that we plan to submit at the end of July, we're currently developing that, and we've had around 150 proposals across the North. And you're right to say we need to think about how we present that. It's not just a big wish list. We need to set out the plan in terms of the recovery and rebuilding stage, and that's kind of linked to the impacts of COVID-19 on the economy, but also on transport. So within that plan, there are proposals to bring forward more flexible ticketing on rail more quickly, around season tickets, which when we come out of this lockdown period, undoubtedly people's behaviour will have changed in terms of rail commuting. And bringing forward contactless payment as well across the rail network and onto light rail as well in the North. We're looking at supporting active travel proposals, and will make the sort of statement that needs to be sustained in investment in active travel. It's not for TfN to get involved in the detail, but we want to support partners in that, in bringing forward active travel, and promote the accelerated investment in schemes that are already in the pipeline waiting on decisions. I mean, there are some highway schemes in West Yorkshire which were submitted 1 to 2 years ago now, waiting on a decision, as well as rail scheme. So that will all go into the plan, themed around the sort of rebuild, recovery, and then supporting the longer term transformational growth and sustainable growth as well. It's important we keep our eye on that sustainable question, inclusive and sort of decarbonising transport in the future. We've done some work as well, very early work, looking at the transport implications of COVID-19 and how that might have longer term impacts on transport as well, which, as well as supporting this ERP, would support work in the future on decarbonisation. I'll stop for any questions.
Thank you very much. There's quite a list there of proposals in there. Has anybody got any questions or comments? Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I'm more interested in delivery, really. And are we satisfied that we've got plenty of different bodies to consult and talk to and involve? Are we happy that the delivery mechanisms, if we get the money, are in place to begin some of these massive pieces of key intervention?
Part of the delivery is, of course, cash. So cash is a fundamental requirement, I suppose. But I'd say, shall I go to Owen for that first, but I'll bring Councillor Kim Groves on that as well, please.
I think that's a really good question, and I agree with Councillor Hinchcliffe in terms of the cash element. That's part of the delivery, and the match funding requirement as well for local partners. And we all know that you're under extreme financial pressures in local transport authorities. So that's one of the kind of asks we'll be putting, I'm sure, to the government, some relaxation around those rules and the cost of developing schemes, sort of the early business case development work. And then it's a case of engagement with the industry, whether that's Network Rail, Highways England, or the wider industry. Can they deliver these schemes? And that's a lens we need to look through, particularly where authorities are proposing a lot of interventions in a short space of time.
Councillor Groves.
Thank you for that question. In terms of the partners, I think Network Rail, during this period of COVID, I've just delivered £1 billion worth of work in so many weeks. And I think it's about the skills set being built up and us encouraging more people to go into the construction, into the rail industry. It's always challenging in terms of delivery and resources. As you know, for the Transforming Cities fund, we've only got 2 years to deliver. So I think collectively, as across West Yorkshire, as we come together, that we need to meet these challenges, and we need to be confident that we can get out there and deliver. And I do think it's achievable with the right planning. And it's crucial because we just need those jobs.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. Just illustrating how everything is interlinked in economic recovery, isn't it? You can't do one thing without the other. I've got Councillor Pennington coming in, then I've seen Councillor Duggan who's wanting to contribute as well. Councillor Pennington.
Thank you, Leader. We talk a great deal about this active travel funding, which is all linking into transport for the North, I'm quite certain. And I find it only right to say some of the figures are quite eye-watering. You know, we've even got 25 million to get your bicycle repaired. I know it's over a period of years, but it all adds up. And I think this will probably be quite towards our chair's heart as well. Can we please, when we're contacting, if Kim is going to write to the Secretary of State, can we please mention Queensbury Tunnel? Because it's an ideal scheme. It connects 3 of our districts. And I'm certainly going to write to Grant Chaps, and I'd like it highlighting in the submission when Kim writes, please. And as we speak, Highways England are filling it in, which is deplorable.
Thank you, Councillor Pennington. You and I have one voice on Queensbury Tunnel. I've already written, as you well know, very disappointing news that we had last week from the Department of Transport. I know all parties are trying to make them change their mind. Councillor Duggan.
I'd certainly support that comment as well. It does seem somewhat ironic that we're talking about trying to build back better, and at the same time we've got a national agency undermining a potential sustainable transport initiative. What I was going to say was on that sort of theme, there's referenced in paragraph 3.1 to clean growth, and I do think that some of those schemes, I understand it's difficult. It's a bit like trying to turn around an ocean tanker, but you know, if post COVID, as has been said, if we are successful in getting more people working from home, a lot of the highways, junction improvement schemes and so on may be far less relevant than the sorts of things to make our rail network fit for purpose, to provide sustainable transport going into the future. So, you know, I accept that these schemes have been in the pipeline for some period of time, but I would hope that at some point there will be an opportunity to review what is most relevant in a post-COVID context and also in a climate change context.
Councillor Groves, did you want to come in on that again, or shall I move to Owen Wilson?
I think we're constantly looking at schemes, but I think in this paper in particular, 2 of the schemes have got real repairs and safety issues and landslip repairs needed. So I think it's crucial that we push those forward.
And a lot of our road infrastructure doesn't have enough pedestrianisation points or cycleways, etc. So all that needs retrofitting, if you like, in our road network. So lots to do. Owen, did you want to come in any of those items raised there?
Yeah, I think on the active travel point, and it's a very, very well-made point and absolutely true. We should do more to support and encourage active travel for the health benefits as well as the environmental benefits. TfN is committed to doing more work looking at potential future what we call future scenarios, the way people live and choose to move around. And we were doing that prior to the coronavirus crisis. That the crisis has really highlighted how rapidly behaviours can change given the kind of external factors, and we'll try and build those lessons learned into the scenario work. Very quick analysis that we've done, and you know, this is something we need to do far more work on, but actually looking at how behaviours have changed, thinking about more people working remotely, shopping remotely, more people doing local trips to the shops, and obviously there's been a huge reduction in public transport use because people have been asked not to use public transport, and a big reduction in car use, which is now climbing back up to levels almost at where it was, and there's a danger it's going to get higher in the short to medium term than it was before. But looking at all of that, we believe you could, with a strong push, and once everyone's back on public transport and encourage more active travel, you could significantly reduce the number of car trips. But actually the other point to make is in terms of car mileage, it's still going to be a major part of the transport mix, at least 60%, because where active travel really works, it's for local short trips. It can't substitute for the longer car trips. Public transport can do that for many trips, but not all. So it's always going to be a mix of different solutions in the future. And we will work with you, and we are working with the Department for Transport to think through how transport and behaviours could change in the future, and how you could influence that change both through transport investment and other policy measures that might be outside our remit, but sit with our partners or with the department or with national government.
Thank you, Owen. So obviously, even before COVID, we were looking at some of these schemes and making sure that they're fit for climate emergency. Obviously, we've got a paper coming up on climate emergency next. And my own understanding of what I looked at so far is actually it will cost more to make sure that our schemes have got climate emergency actually into those schemes. Obviously, if you've got a bridge that needs a cycle lane on it, you need a wider bridge. That's obviously an expensive infrastructure investment. But government needs to be challenged about that, and obviously need to provide funding appropriately so we can build a future which is going to be attuned to what people need and want, which is something which saves the planet and makes sure we respond to the climate emergency. So I can't see anybody else indicating on that paper. Councillor Groves, are you proposing that we note that paper as per the recommendation?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm happy to second that. Can I see all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. So we've already referred to the next paper as we've been along. As you'd imagine, climate emergency goes through everything we do these days. And there's a paper next outlining what work has been going on throughout this period, because it's not stopped, has it? And actually, constituents will say to me they've enjoyed the cleaner air, for example, and therefore want to continue that. And we need to deliver on that desire that people have for a cleaner air and a better environment to live in. It's better for all of us. Alan, would you like to introduce this paper? I think you've also got officers on the call who may want to join in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So last summer, the Combined Authority declared a climate emergency and set a target to have a net zero carbon economy by 2038. There was already quite a lot of work in progress following the adoption of an energy strategy and delivery plan in late 2018, and that work continues. And the report gives a bit of an update on some of the schemes that are progressing from that. The big thing that to draw to the Combined Authority's attention, and again there'll be a more detailed paper on this at the next meeting in July, is the emission reduction pathway study. And this is a big piece of work that will set out how the Combined Authority, or rather how the region will be able to become a net zero carbon economy by 2038. So it is looking at several sectors, including transport, energy, industry, buildings, waste, land use, and for each one of those setting out what needs to be achieved in order to hit that target. It is very challenging, and the results will be presented next time. There will then be an opportunity for us to go out to consult with stakeholders across the region. There are a number of there's been an impact from COVID on how we're able to go about that, but as you said, the work is continuing. The other point, just to draw your attention to before I take questions, is that relevant to the last couple of items, we have commissioned a piece of work to improve our decision making in relation to the climate emergency. So there is a piece of work that is going to be carried out which looks at all of the schemes that we are bringing forward and reviews their potential impact on climate with regard to carbon emissions, but also provides us with a new way of assessing carbon impact for future decisions, because, as has been said previously, the current way that the assessment works, it doesn't take carbon into account properly, and that's not an issue just for us. That's an issue for the Department of Transport as well, where, for instance, things that are bad for car users are deemed to be a cost, whereas of course part of what we are trying to do as a region is to encourage people to use more active travel modes and public transport rather than driving. So that's quite an important piece of work as well. I will stop there, conscious of time, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important piece of work continuing, and obviously we need to get those delayed into a green rather than a amber. Realise obviously COVID has had an impact on many projects and schemes across the region. Councillor Pennington, did you want to come with a question?
Thank you, Leader. I'll be brief. Just a question for Alan here. If he's bringing this this reduction pathway survey to the next meeting, does it take any account at all of 900 flights a week coming into LBA?
I'll take Councillor Galton as well whilst we're doing that.
Thanks, Chair. It was more of it's understanding what our responsibilities are as a combined authority, because of course our own councils have their climate emergency responses, the government has its climate emergency response, and we have one as a combined authority. And there are some things that are best addressed at a certain scale. I would have preferred, actually, if we'd had a regional response, for instance, to the climate change, because our ability to, for instance, have our own energy security policy by enabling greater renewable energy generation, a lot of that will actually be done in the wider countryside as opposed to in a very urbanized area. And it's just to understand what we feel that we're adding as a combined authority to what councils are doing, or are we an enabler? Are we a facilitator? I don't understand that. I'm on the authority. What bits we should be focusing on as a combined authority and what we should be left to the local authorities? Because I think that will help all of us focus attentions even further. So, for instance, in terms of our responsibility for adult education, I'd like to see something else in here about what we think the future jobs are that will be needed in our area to respond to the green economy. So, for instance, one of the things I discovered when we were looking at it in Leeds was that there's going to be a lot of carbon offsetting because we're not going to be able to turn this tank around quickly enough. And that will mean a lot more arboricultural work at scale. And however, we've only got one college in the entire region that does our arboricultural qualifications. So maybe expanding that is a very small but needed part of our response. And is that one done at this level?
And can I congratulate you for saying arboricultural as well, Councillor Galton? That's twice actually in that contribution. But I think some of those questions will be answered in the next paper, because absolutely that's very much part of it. So there'll be this is a staging point to say where we are in the process, but the next paper that comes is going to be more comprehensive, I believe. So I'm going to go now to the next. I'll get those answered all at once, I think, just on the interest of time. Roger Marsh, and then I've got Councillor Shabir Pandor.
Yes, thank you, Susan. And to Councillor Galton's point, I guess I wanted to just direct people to some work of NP11 and a strategy that's being developed, and we've had outside involvement and is actually being considered by government bays in particular on a net zero north, because actually it is about both bottom up and top down. And it would be useful, I think, for colleagues, and maybe his officers could direct members of the combined authority to that piece of work by NP11, which has been, as I say, pulled together and was the focus of a 1,000 person attended conference late last year, something of the past, I guess, because it does actually answer part of Councillor Galton's challenge, as well as a proposal to government for funding. But also, as we are setting out a huge offer for the North and its component parts to be leading the way nationally for the whole clean, renewable and all the rest of it energy approaches. So if I could just share that, Susan, thank you.
Thank you. And it just demonstrates that climate emergency is something that has to go on at all levels. It's a global issue as well, isn't it? As well as a local one and all points in between. Councillor Shabir Pandor. Councillor Pandor, do you want to take your mute off?
I'm getting too used to muting myself. Thanks, Chair. I'll be quick. A few points very quickly. Firstly, I think, can't remember who it was, but we talked about a regional response. I think we need a national response, and I think the national response was going to come, but we got in the middle of the pandemic crisis. Because while we were going through the devolution negotiations, one of the things the ministers were very clear about is the devolution, once we sign on the dotted line, which we have done, there will be further rounds of monies that will come available from national government around climate emergency. And that is something that they said very clearly that we will be able to actually bid for. And I suspect that they were actually working on the details in terms of getting a national response. So although there's a lot of things happening locally and we might have our own targets in our local authorities, and then we've got one within the combined authority, and there's so many variables, we are still on the back foot, I think. And we really need that national funding stream and strategy to actually give us some clear guidance, right? Yeah, so we can then join up what I think Councillor Galton said, that we can join up everything together and have that maximum impact moving forward. Because at the moment, there's so many priorities that are coming out. You blink and you miss it. But I'm hopeful, talking to ministers, that there is something in the pipeline, and I'm hoping that there'll be an announcement made. around climate emergency and how a devolved mayor can actually tap into that. That would address some of the issues you're talking about. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pandora. Can I ask Alan to come back in on those questions then?
Yes, thank you, everyone. To take Councillor Pennington's question first, the pathway work includes all emissions within the region at the moment, including aviation. It's worth noting that the vast majority of transport emissions come from roads. The second is the second question to Councillor Galton's point. There is a need for, and this question was about what our role as a CA is and the role of councils. There is a role for all levels of governance, and indeed not just the councils and the combined authority, but also there is wider collaboration at a Yorkshire and Humber level, and also the Northeast through the Northeast Energy Hub, and we are working together on a range of projects. An example would be, say, the district heat network in Leeds, the Leeds Pipe Scheme. That is a locally delivered project by Leeds City Council, but is supported by the Regional Energy Accelerator. And so the purpose of this work is what are the things that it makes sense to do at scale, and what support can we give to local authorities and businesses across the region to decarbonise. And I think I've probably answered the questions with that.
Thank you. I just missed Councillor Groves actually. Briefly, do you want to say something, Councillor Groves?
Just to really say that actually through the decarbonising transport work, I think we've got to acknowledge that we're making significant changes already in terms of bidding for the funding for cleaner and greener buses, the work within the rail operators, and actually our mass transit plan that we're working on, our connectivity strategy all contributes to this.
It's a huge piece of work that touches everything we do. I think we can, at every level, I think we've all covered that. So with that, can we recommend that paper for approval? It's an obviously noting progress. There's a further more comprehensive document coming back at the end of July, I believe. Can I just see all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. Moving on now to then the governance paper. Angela, would you like to go through this, or is it Caroline?
It's Caroline on this one.
Caroline.
Thank you, Chair. Just got the wrong page up in front of me. I shall be brief on this because hopefully the paper is self-explanatory. The paper's twofold. Firstly, it relates to the fact that the decision has been taken not to hold an annual meeting this year, as with other partner councils, but there are still a number of governance matters which it would be helpful to have confirmed at this meeting, and they are set out succinctly at recommendations 9.1 to 9.5 of this report. So I trust those are self-explanatory, although I'm happy to take any questions on those. The second purpose of the report is it's a little bit of a mop-up in terms of private sector membership on our panels. So members will recall at an earlier meeting, there were some nominations from the LEP board for some additional private sector members following a recruitment process. That recruitment process didn't actually conclude because of the pandemic. And so this paper puts forward 2 further recommendations for additions to the panels, which result from that finalised recruitment process. So Appendix 1 sets out the proposals there. Members will see that there is a new member proposed for the big panel from the construction sector, and one from the employment and skills from the manufacturing sector. And the report also proposes an extension to the membership of the LEP board member, Amir Hussain, to the big panel and place panel for a second term of 3 years.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I should just say, perhaps for completeness and just for the minutes, as you mentioned at the start of the meeting, there has been a change in membership of the CA as well, with the resignation of Councillor David Hall and his substitute Geraldine Carter, with replacement appointments of Councillor Lee and Councillor Andrew Carter as his substitute. So I just say that for the purpose of capturing it in the minutes. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Galton, did you have a question?
Yes, I just thought it was worth expressing for the record, because I have raised it with Angela when in my briefing. I was concerned that some of these boards have diversity issues. One of them is all male, and some of the business balance on some of the other committees are heavily weighted for particular sectors. So in some, the finance and law are overrepresented, it could be argued, and in others there is no representation at all within our LEP for the agricultural sector and businesses in there. So it's more about getting a reassurance that that diversity is recognised, or lack of it, and that they will be enabled to participate in discussions and agenda setting.
Certainly, my understanding is the diversity of the LEP is ahead of others in the country, I understand. Roger?
Yeah, just to reassure Councillor Galton that as regards the LEP board itself, we have the most diverse LEP board, as far as I'm aware, out of the 38. And when it comes to particularly around gender, we've achieved a 50-50 board, which is about 2 and a bit years ahead of current government guidelines, as well as being reflective of all of the other aspects of diversity across our city region. But I do take about agriculture, and that's something that I obviously will pick up upon, but we have tried our level best to ensure that all of the panels and supporting boards are as representative as we can be. I would add that we are lucky in our part of the world, and that goes to his point, that there's no lack of appetite for being involved in our agenda, whereas other parts of England, there's been a decrease in interest in LEPs and their activities. But I do take your points on board, and insofar as we can address those in the intervening period, we will seek to do so.
I think Councillor Galton's just noted that he accepts that the LEP itself is very diverse. It's the boards underneath it that I think he wants to see improvements on, which is fair enough. Councillor Pandor?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what Roger said, and just to reassure Councillor Galton, because I chair the Inclusive Growth and Public Policy Board, which is probably going to get more work going its way. And recently we recruited 3 new board members. 2 were female, and they got there because of what they can offer, and one was a black man, and I think he came at a timely time, just before the issues that we're facing around Black Lives Matter. But I think it's a really valid point and a really strong point, and I think we still need to actually go a long way. Although we are probably an exemplar LEP, there's still a lot of work to do. I completely resonate what Roger's saying. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pandor. So obviously it's a good challenge, isn't it, to make sure that everything we do reflects the diversity and the rich diversity of the region that we represent, whether that's gender, race, ethnicity, and faith, etc., and disability. So with that, I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. So can I see all those in favour of that item, please show. That is carried. Thank you very much. So moving on now to what I believe might be the final item on the agenda, which is about corporate performance. Angela Taylor, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is your normal update report on a range of corporate planning and performance issues. So I'll just take you briefly through the report and then happy to take any comments or questions at the end. So the first section on page 191, around the corporate plan for the year just ended. In Appendix 1, you have got progress on the indicators that we set for the year. And they're almost complete. There is a bit of a lag in collecting some of them, but generally we're reporting an overall positive position in terms of achieving the key performance indicators for last year. Second section over the page is on corporate risk. And in the appendix, you also have a summary of the current high-level risks. This includes some COVID risks, and we're looking at expanding those out into some of the specifics around some of the funding risks facing us, the risk around the public transport sector, for example, and the risk to business as we come out of some of the current restrictions on businesses operating and how that might put pressure on us to respond. Revenue budget position at para 27 onwards. We currently have the auditors in. We have closed the last year, and we are hoping to get audited accounts approved at next month's Governance and Audit Committee. We have managed to make some further savings in year, some as a result of some additional interest earned as some of the capital programmes didn't quite hit the target we had hoped for last year. And a number of other savings we managed to secure. They have gone into our reserves. So our reserves position is currently 8 million. We are clearly a big exercise at the moment in terms of how we balance this year's budget. The budget was balanced in February when we set it. Clearly COVID is having a significant impact on that budget. We are reforecasting, we are estimating. It is a very fluid environment. There are lots of uncertainties and unknowns, but we are looking to bring you a more detailed report to your next meeting, setting out the impact we know of COVID, the anticipated future impacts, and some of these will be obviously for the current year, which we need to find a way to balance the budget. We also need to look at the longer term impact of that. So we'll bring that back to you to the July meeting with some further information. I will pause at that, and I can see there's at least one question.
Thank you very much. And obviously we referred extensively to the financial position earlier in this meeting, but Councillor Carter, did you want to come in?
Yes, please, on two issues. The first one, I've mentioned it before, and I'm afraid you're going to get fed up of hearing me say it, but with the experience of Leeds yesterday, the financial stress testing issues are ones which everyone should take extremely seriously. Reassured with Ben's comments earlier on, but what is absolutely right is we're in a very fluid and threatening position, shall we say, on all sorts of levels. Most important that in our risk assessments, proper financial stress testing is carried out on projects. More particularly, though, then, if you look at the corporate plan commitment section in Appendix 1, it underlines that our commitment to invest in services with projects worth 398 million, and the actual forecast spend is 289 million. And this was before COVID, or a lot of it. But I realise there's been a full review of the programme with partner councils, and it's resulted in this rebasing of projects from 2020 to 21 onwards. It goes back to the point I made really on Transport for the North and our actual ability to deliver on the ground. And I would like some comments on that. If necessary, by all means, send me a written briefing, bearing in mind I've just joined the board, so I don't want to bog us down unduly, but I would like to know, because those figures stand out a mile, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carter. So certainly delivery is something we're all focused on and want to see accelerated. I just wonder, actually, should I bring in Melanie here, or Ben? Who wants to take that? Melanie, Director of Delivery.
Sorry, I'll just come off mute. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons why we didn't achieve our capital spend last year. Firstly, I mean, obviously we were affected by COVID. So the fourth quarter, our figures were down because there were delays to some projects. We also had a number of funding decisions that we were waiting for from government that didn't come through in time, which then delayed our projects. So things like HIF, major route network funding, where we need to have all the funding in place before we can start. So that did cause us some problems. And then the third reason is we all, the combined authority and district partners, diverted resources from delivering the transport fund to preparing the bid for the Transforming Cities Fund. And that was a really good news story. We got the largest award in the country, but unfortunately that was at the expense of delivering our existing programmes, and we seem to get into these rounds of having to bid for funding, and we in its entirety we do not have enough capacity across the region to be delivering at this level and to be bidding for funding. So we find ourselves in a difficult situation here.
Thank you, that's very clear, and just shows the virtue of governments just devolving money for us to spend according to priorities set by us as leaders, rather than having to bid into a competition, which may or may not lead to revenue at the expense of other schemes being delivered. So thank you for that clarity. With that, if I see no more questions or comments on this paper, can I just propose that we follow recommendations, which I believe is for noting. So all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. And then the next report, I believe, is just about the minutes of meetings that have gone before us, which I don't think needs approval, does it? It's just for noting. And I believe then we're at the end of the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance. I'm just checking with Angela and Ben that there's nothing else we need to cover. Are we okay? No, we're okay. I'm seeing fine. Thumbs up. Lovely. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance. It's been quite a long meeting, but obviously lots of points covered, and keep safe and stay well. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.